Committee on Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education and related agencies will come to order. Certainly, we're pleased this morning to see Dr. Francis Collins and the Institute directors from NIH with us. Glad to have you here to talk about the budget. We look forward to the testimony and the opportunity to talk with each person on the panel about these issues as they come up. You know, throughout history, the practice of medicine has been largely reactive. Even today, we have to wait until the onset of most diseases before we're able to treat them or begin the process of curing them. Science doesn't fully understand the genetic and environmental factors that cause major diseases such as cancer, diabetes, Alzheimer's disease. Because of that, treatments are often imprecise, often unpredictable, and unfortunately often not effective. This budget that you all have proposed really proposes a revolutionary concept of precision medicine, an initiative that would really address each individual in a precise and often different way. Instead of one-size-fits-all approach, the Precision Medicine Initiative would allow physicians to really individualize the treatments on patients based on their unique genetic makeup. By having access to each individual's genetic makeup now, a physician has the potential, we hope, to decide not to use or to use specific and targeted drugs. As the chairman of the subcommittee, I certainly will support this project. I hope we can prioritize and intend to prioritize funding for NIH as one of the things the committee does, even in a year where our funding challenges are greater than they sometimes are. We always have funding challenges at home, at work, in the government, have those funding challenges, but part of that challenge is to decide how to prioritize how we spend our money, and certainly I'm anticipating that this committee will be as supportive as we possibly can of not only the Precision Medicine Initiative, but also of the ongoing work of NIH and the promise it holds for the future. I look forward to working with you, Dr. Collins, with the ranking member and the members of this committee as we pursue the ideas that you're going to bring to the table today and the potential of what can be done in NIH largely and specifically at each of the institutes that are well represented here today. We're lucky to have the chairman of the full committee with us. The ranking member of the full committee will be here as well. And it's a great opportunity for me to get to work with Senator Murray. And Senator Murray, if you have an opening statement, we'll have that before we go to Dr. Collins. Thank you, Dr. Collins. And we'll start with 5-minute rounds, and we'll probably have as many rounds as we can while we've got this great opportunity to talk to you and about what you're doing on precision medicine. Obviously, a long path into the future where precision medicine might very well define most medicine at some future point. But what would you see as some maybe 5- and 10-year short-term markers to look at to see whether we're getting where we all would like to get as we move toward this precision medicine initiative?
I very much appreciate the question, and this is something that we're all quite excited about. And actually, we just concluded yesterday a 2-day public workshop trying to map out exactly that kind of issue. What kind of uses could a cohort of 1 million individuals be put to if that were present 5 years from now? As an example, we really don't at the present time have the ability to take full advantage of what we've learned about individual differences in drug response and see how those work in the real world. The FDA has on the label now more than 100 drugs, information that say knowing the genetic information about the patient would be useful in this situation in order to choose the right dose and make sure it's the right drug for that patient. But in practice, that's not happening. The logistics aren't there. Imagine, though, you have 1 million people whose complete genomes have already been determined with their full participation and permission and are available then with the click of a mouse, so that when a decision is being made about writing a prescription, it's possible for the healthcare provider to immediately know whether the dose needs to be adjusted or whether that's just the wrong drug for that person. We could then really rigorously test what is gained by that additional information in terms of outcomes. And a large-scale study of this sort, which is currently not possible, would make that happen. That would be an example. I want to turn to my colleague, Dr. Lowy, because the other part of the precision medicine effort is this early focus on cancer, which I think will reap rewards maybe even sooner than the process of getting this million cohort underway.
Thank you, Dr. Collins, and thank you, Senator Blunt, for your comment and your strong support for NIH. We really are at an inflection point where it comes to cancer treatment. As a result of the genomic revolution, we now understand in much more detail than ever before that cancer, instead of being one disease, even breast cancer, for example, is many different diseases. And the opportunity for targeted treatment that we hope will be better, smarter, and have fewer side effects really is at hand. We already have several clear examples of targeted FDA-approved drugs that are able to do just that. With the new Precision Medicine Initiative, we are able, at a much larger scale, to be able to conduct clinical trials that involve both adults and children, that instead of being focused principally on the organ site where the cancer develops, instead is focused on the abnormalities in the cancer, and the targeted drugs treat those specific abnormalities. I have gone into this in more detail in my written comments, but I just wanted to highlight for you some of the key elements.
Dr. Collins, the million-person cohort, how would you intend to assemble that and put that information together to start with?
That's very much a topic of intense conversation right now. We have put together a working group of experts who met this week and who will meet again each month between now and August. And in fact, the next meeting, which is actually going to be in Senator Alexander's state in Nashville at Vanderbilt, will look at this very question of what's the ideal kind of cohort that you want to achieve as far as demographics. We believe that we can accomplish some of this by taking advantage of cohorts that have already been put together by various healthcare delivery systems or perhaps by the Veterans Administration, and therefore be able to do this more cheaply than if you had to start from scratch. But undoubtedly there will be gaps in terms of the representation. We want to be sure, for instance, that this has power to be able to tell us things about health disparities. We'll need to figure out how to fill those gaps. By August, this working group will make strong recommendations, and we will then be ready, starting in FY16, which of course is not far away, to initiate the process of putting this cohort together.
Thank you. Senator Murray. Thank you, Senator. On 2 or 3 points, and then we'll go to Senator Murray. On the stewardship discussion, the strategic plan, I want to be very supportive of that. I think that's a major announcement on your part. And as I understood the announcement, the 27 centers you currently have their plans.
That's right.
But this would be the first time you sort of evaluate and try to prioritize where you want to go as you look at all of those 27 centers to really come up with an overall strategic plan. Do I understand that correctly?
That's absolutely right, Senator.
And you hope to have that available by the end of this year?
By December, yes, sir.
Would be very helpful. I want to just encourage you to do that. I'm supportive of it. I think that your efforts there, the questions are better asked by you, frankly, to start with. You know, you've got those 27 plans to look at. You've got the forum to hash that out and have the internal arguments you need to have about why this is maybe a bigger priority than that. And clearly I see this as responsive to the discussions that you and I and you've had with many other members of this committee about let's sit down and hear from you about how we're really prioritizing this. On the Alzheimer's discussion, I think in the bill last year, the objective was for you to have a plan that would reach a goal by 2025. And that goal was what? To have a cure for Alzheimer's?
Or a delay in the onset, a major advance in terms of preventing or delaying the onset.
And we should expect that report by when? I think you've already said, Francis, and I'm sorry I didn't.
So in terms of what we were asked for specifically in the new piece of the omnibus is not only a plan, but a bypass budget of what it would take to get there. And the plan itself gets refreshed every year, and there will be a new version of the research plan tomorrow. But we are also then going to attach that to an estimate of what it would take to accomplish that, because we've been asked to do so by the omnibus language.
And we'll be seeing something tomorrow?
Tomorrow you will see the outcome of the summit on research that was held in February, bringing people from the U.S. and outside the U.S. to really nail down what are the highest priorities right now for research in this space. This will be the second time we've had such a summit, and this is a major refresh of what the research agenda is.
Well, I think the precision medicine discussion, the brain discussion, and the strategic plan discussion probably make enough news for today, or I'd press you a little bit on why can't you tell us today what you're going to tell people tomorrow. But I look forward to that tomorrow. Dr. Isel, as you know, I've been very interested in how we prioritize mental health or bring it to the same level of all other behavioral health, to all other health issues. The statistic that I believe is generally used now, and always NIH is sort of the source, is 1 out of 4 adult Americans have a behavioral health problem, a diagnosable behavioral health problem that's almost always treatable if it's diagnosed. Is that number still a good number, or do you have a better number we should be using? And
I think in this case, we tend to focus more on those who have the most disabling, or what we now call serious mental illnesses. That's more like 1 in 7 or 1 in 9, something like that. I think the total number runs to about 17 million adults. But what's critical to remember, in contrast to what we've talked about for Alzheimer's disease, these are diseases, chronic diseases of young people. So 75% of that number have onset before age 25. So that makes this a particularly challenging public health issue.
right, and we all heard Senator Mikulski's story earlier today about how, when talking to people at schools, what's the single biggest thing we could do to help, and this obviously right in the area that you're working. What about the other number? If 1 out of 9 is debilitating or serious, what would be the bigger contextual number of behavioral health that's diagnosable and treatable?
Well, across the board, about 1 in 4 is the number that we think about across the lifespan in terms of people being affected. So
now, in the Armed Services Committee that I was on last year, I think that was Armed Services as opposed to Defense Approps, but I may have asked this in one of those two. I asked the Surgeon Generals of the military if they thought that 1 in 4 statistic was how to apply to people in the military. The answer I got was, we don't have any reason to believe it's not about the same, that we recruit from the general population about the same. And what's been happening in the military as it relates to how we deal with behavioral health problems?
Well, as you know, Senator, the suicide rate in the military, particularly in active duty, has gone up significantly, doubled. It's actually surpassed the civilian rate for people in the same age bracket. It's beginning to come down slightly in the last 3 years, but we've gotten new numbers just in the last couple of days, so it's still up there. It's still high. And DOD and especially the Department of the Army have been very, very focused on how to bend the curve there. We've been working with them through this STARS project with over 100,000 soldiers over the past 5 years, and that project has given us a much better sense of how to focus their efforts on those who are at highest risk.
Thank you. Couple of things. Dr. Gibbons, the budget request talks about a new program to less expensively identify, recruit, and enroll patients in clinical trials. How does that impact your work? How would that work, and how does that impact your work in heart, blood, lung research?
Well, thank you, Senator, for that question. As you pointed out, and Dr. Collins responded earlier, as public servants, it's our intention to be accountable stewards for the taxpayers' money. So we're always vigilant for opportunities to be more efficient, effective, and economical at what we do in making these investments. As Dr. Collins alluded to, one of the more expensive aspects of biomedical research relates to clinical trials. And certainly we're always looking for different ways to ask and answer these important questions that transform and advance medicine. One of the aspects that we're looking at most recently, as you alluded to, were what we're calling simple pragmatic trials. And now, many trials can't fit that category and must be done in the traditional way, but we're taking advantage of transformation in biomedicine, in which so much more of information about a patient is in a digital format, and where with health systems, we can track, identify patients who might be eligible for a trial. They're embedded within a system where we can recruit them. Data is collected that identifies their clinical characteristics, in which the trial then can be launched in the context of where they ordinarily get care. And indeed, the follow-up, the endpoints, can also be captured, perhaps in their electronic medical record, again, within these health systems. So this is a transformation that's really only happened in the last 5 to 10 years, and we now want to leverage that embedded clinical infrastructure to do research in the same way we do patient care. And so that's enabled us to do those trials. One, for example, relates to chronic kidney disease, where there's a high incidence of coronary deaths, and morbidity relates to that. Now, as was mentioned, pharma may spend $100 million to do a clinical endpoint study for cardiovascular disease. But by taking a strategy of embedding this within a health system, we can track patients with chronic kidney disease who are often making many touch points within the health system, do a randomized trial to look at the effect of, for example, vitamin D, which is thought, hypothesized, to influence cardiovascular outcomes, and do a study on a pretty large scale, 5,000 individuals. And that can be done for 1/10 of the amount that a traditional sort of pharma trial can be done. So that's how we're trying to be more efficient and effective and economical at doing clinical research.
The other thing I wanted to mention was on the M-Health, the mobile health, the cell phone technology. While I don't think you're in the approval process business very much, if at all, you're clearly in the discussion business, and you're going to be in these discussions about how do we want to let this develop, in what way should it develop. You mentioned the Fitbit that many of us carry, and it's helpful. If it goes wrong, it's not actually life-threatening. And I think there are lots of other things that could be helpful and not life-threatening that will quickly improve people's capacity to both report in new ways and monitor their own health situations. I would just encourage that discussion as much as possible to, while we want to look at things that truly can be life-threatening, that otherwise let this develop on its own. There is a market out there. This will develop, by the way, somewhere. The only question is whether, I think the only question is whether we put enough obstacles that it doesn't develop in the United States, and we're trying to figure out how to get from some other country a blood pressure monitoring thing that's easier than the current way you monitor your blood pressure. Just any comment you might have on that, Dr. Collins.
I totally agree with you that this is an enormous opportunity, but we need not to screw it up, and there's always a possibility of doing that if we're not thoughtful. I think, again, NIH's role, where I think we can be really helpful, is to collect data and to figure out what is the evidence that these various kinds of wearable sensors can improve health, either by improving the likelihood of staying healthy or managing a chronic illness like hypertension or diabetes. But you're right, it gets much more complicated if the monitor is doing something that could potentially be harmful. If you have an artificial pancreas on your wrist instead of something telling you how many steps you took, the difference becomes quite acute. We're aware of that. Obviously, the FDA has an incredibly important role here. We're working more closely with the FDA than ever in space like this. And we're actually having, of our 4 workshops on precision medicine, the 4th in late July will be at Intel in California, where we are inviting a lot of the people who have the most inspiring ideas about M-Health to come and talk about what they need in order to have precision medicine be a platform for testing out what they're developing, to get answers as quickly as possible in the real world in a well-monitored situation, so you know what's working.
All right, thank you. Senator Murray. Well, thank you, Dr. Collins. Thanks to you and your whole team that came today. The record will stay open for 1 week for additional questions. The subcommittee is in recess until 10 a.m. on Thursday, May the 7th. Thank you all.